like to call to order the meeting of the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education on July 16th, 2013. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Snoblin?
Here.
Mr. Edson?
Here.
Mr. Moorman? Here. Mr. Black?
Here.
Mr. Schreiber?
Here.
Mr. Bergener?
Here.
Mr. Powers?
Good evening. Got a very quick President's report. First, most importantly, want to welcome Barry Rogers to his first meeting of the board and his, 12th day on the job or so. It's great to have you here. Second, just to give an update on the board committee process that I reported on last month, in the hopes that we would have community members selected by this meeting. We have not met that goal, but we have interviewed 3 community members thus far and have 4 more that we will have completed by the end of the day Thursday. And from those 7 candidates, we will make the selection of 2 community members to participate on each of the board committees, the Education Committee and the Finance and Operation Committee, or Operations and Finance Committee, depending on who you ask. And that is it. No, it isn't. There were 10 others who applied for positions, and I just want to emphasize to those people and others who recognize that not every applicant is taken into the committee structure. Please continue to look for opportunities to participate. There are a lot of quality people and a lot of good knowledge in the community that we could all benefit from. So don't be discouraged by, perhaps you're relieved by, but please don't be discouraged by a lack of acceptance into one of these committees, and continue to look for opportunities. Thanks. Mike Simic, Superintendent Report. I feel like this is really loud. Is that just me?
Thank you, Mr. Bergener, and I'd like to hand off to Mr. Rogers to begin. That's a nice thing to be able to say, to hand something off to Mr. Rogers, by the way, and his first principal report.
Thank you, Mike. As I'm getting started, I'm in the process of meeting with school and district leaders, staff. I had a wonderful meeting with our parent APT President Stephanie Cook. I'm in the process of meeting with our student leaders, because I think that's also very important. I can tell you that everyone's been outstanding up to this point, and I'm really excited about getting started. As I'm talking with everyone, I'm feeling a great deal of positive energy around the starting of the 2013-2014 school year. On a personal note, I can tell you my wife and I have been exploring Lake Forest and discovered some of the great restaurants and sweet establishments as well with the kids. And I can tell you that, again, we're enamored with the place and just really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. A number of things I'd like to mention. First, as past meeting for the board's information, wanted to say thank you to Mr. Albus for his ongoing work to engage our neighbors as we undertake a very sizable project at our high school. And our last meeting, we had a number of concerned neighbors that came and politely and even humorously expressed how we were Godzilla, a friendly Godzilla, but nonetheless, when we take actions, it has a significant impact. And Mr. Albus's efforts have been steady and continuing and ongoing to engage the neighbors in a process to address their concerns to the degree that we are able. And I want to say thank you for that and make sure the board knew that that was occurring. We have 3 folks that are new with us in the organization in the room today. First, Mr. Rogers. We've spoken at some length about Mr. Rogers and the excitement attending his arrival here, and very public engagement on that one. And less public are folks behind the scenes, Andy Hendrickson, Dr. Andy Hendrickson, is joining us as a shared service employee. This is opportunity to leverage his experience and expertise, and we're seeing that already just today. We saw evidence of his experience as a principal and also in HR in District 67 extend to benefit the high school. So Mr. Hendrickson, Dr. Hendrickson is known for his engagement of others. He is the great includer and kind and gentle to a degree unimaginable for most of us, and that's a good place for us to have somebody in HR able to deliver a difficult message in a very, very kind way. So a velvet glove, but sometimes also an iron fist underneath it. So also we have Lauren Fagel joining us. Also comes to us with a very significant degree of background and expertise, and that's one of the things that has impressed me already as Mr. Rogers and Mrs. Fagel have begun work. The type of questions that they ask and the experience that they bring to the work is immediately evident, that they are poking and prodding and pulling and making lists and creating charts and all sorts of things to make us better already. And I'd like to say thank you for that. It's early recognition for early engagement. One of the things that is most important for us in the summer is to recognize that districts that work really, really hard in the summer, very frequently we've worked harder in the summer than we do during the school year. And the harder you work in the summer, the better you execute during the school year. And that is clearly an intention that we have. And so what is going on right now is a great deal of planning and a great deal of exploration by new members of our executive team, and they're doing a terrific job of that already. I can already see plans that are coming together, needs being identified, and then sketches of future work coming together. So thank you for that, and expect to hear more and more about what that looks like in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you. It's now time for public participation. If there's anyone who would like to address the board, please make your comments from the podium, give us your name and address, and identify any group that you might be representing while here, and I'd ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mrs. Thorner.
Hello, I'm Nancy Thorner, Lake Bluff, 331 East Blodgett Avenue in Lake Bluff. And just as a concerned citizen, again, this is going to be about Common Core. I've been inundating with you about Common Core for a while, but this was a very interesting article that was published in the Washington Post by Valerie Strauss. Now, it concerns Ari Duncan, and everybody knows that he has a relationship here to Chicago, and he's now education secretary under Obama. It seems that Ari Duncan's main job now is trying to go around giving defenses of Common Core to different groups, such as newspaper reporters and also to the Chamber of Commerce. Now, if the news editors take Duncan up on his call for them to look deeply into the Common Core, they will find that Duncan didn't tell the whole story. This year, some states led by Republican governors began to pull away from the standards. Protests by educators, parents, students, and others began to grow as it became clear that the core implementation was being rushed, and some students were being given tests said to be Common Core aligned, even though teachers hadn't had enough time to create materials around the tests. Last week, Duncan bowed to that reality, announcing that he was giving the 37 states plus the District of Columbia, which had won federal waivers from the most egregious mandates of the No Child Left Behind Act, an extra year to implicate teacher evaluations. Now, what happened, this means that the states won't have to have the Common Core standards until 2016, which is fine. Now, Duncan, in a speech to newspaper editors, said the federal government didn't start or write the standards, and that is true. He said that it wasn't mandated either, though critics argue that it was coerced. Ari Duncan was also right when he said the core is not a curriculum, even though the core authors released a book of criteria to education publishers about what should be in Common Core curriculum. Duncan did mention the rushed implementation, nor the hundreds of millions of dollars the federal government has plowed into the testing creation effort. He has said for years that the core aligned tests would be game changers, and be able to assess students much more broadly. But he didn't say that there wasn't enough money or enough time to create those type of tests. Now, Duncan thinks, of course, that the Common Core State Standards Initiative are going to not be developed, but his speech tells really another story. He is very, very concerned. Now, I am a member of the Heartland Institute and also a blogger there, and in going to the last meeting, I was able to get the books about Common Core that was put out by the Heartland Institute by Joy Paulman. She's a research fellow at the Heartland Institute, and I'd like to give all of you a nice booklet about what she has to say with lots of research about Common Core. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Thorner. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to address the board? No? Okay, then we can move on. Reports and discussion. I believe we are free of reports and discussion for the month of July. So we move on to board committee reports. Board Education Committee, Nicki Snoblin.
As Todd discussed, we've been interviewing new committee members for the coming year. We hope to have those in place quite soon, I think by the end of the week, I think.
Right.
And our first scheduled meeting of the Education Committee is Wednesday, September 4th at, I believe, 1:30 p.m., although I'm not sure that's set in stone yet either. So I'm looking forward to that. We had some excellent people who we've interviewed, and I think we're going to have a really good committee again this year.
Thank you, Nicki. Board Finance and Operations Committee, Mr. Block.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen. The Finance and Operations Committee met on July 9th. Main items on the agenda were a high-level presentation by Mr. Albus of the tentative fiscal year 14, this current year budget. And I won't say too much about that because I suspect, Alan, you're making a presentation later this evening. It's on the agenda. We then talked about a number of projects, two in particular, that are in the construction phase, the track replacement project in particular. We toured the site. We took a close look at the detention pond area, which has now been dug down to its ultimate depth. We talked at some length about an alternative landscape plan and alternative fencing associated with that site in response to some of the community concerns and discussions that have taken place, and I think those things are still evolving. I don't know, Alan, whether you have anything further to report there tonight, but go ahead.
In the next, I would say 2 weeks, we're going to try and set up another neighborhood meeting and roll out a conceptual landscape plan and then gather input on the types of plantings that would be appropriate in the areas for both the detention area and the east parking lot of the school.
Yeah, and by the east part of the school, he's talking about where the tennis courts used to be, the employee parking lot is, where that lot that the school owns, where we still utilize the garage for storage area. We were presented a very tentative landscape plan and some preliminary cost estimate numbers indicating that we can do an enhanced job for a reasonable amount of money in terms of landscaping, and I think make the surrounding residents feel more comfortable and wind up with a higher quality product. I think we're headed down that path. We also talked about the work on the deck-drawn units. We actually went upstairs and toured above the natatorium. Those board members who had never seen a deck-drawn unit before, not that many people would have the opportunity. It's a massive piece of equipment. And lastly, we talked somewhat about a new storage area, primarily centered around where their garage right now is on the east side of campus, and building a new structure there to allow storage of certain maintenance and grounds equipment. So I think that's it, unless the other members have any comments.
Comments, questions? None? Thank you, Mr. Block. Liaison reports. Mr. Moorman has an update to provide on NSSED.
Yeah, I did attend the NSSED, which, if people don't know, it's the North Suburban Special Education District. It was more a looking at the structure. Right now it has a governing board of 7 members, then an executive committee of all 18 members. The plan now is to eliminate the governing board and have the executive committee operate more as a committee of the whole. And it should flatten out the structure a little bit, make it the board a little more responsive to all the districts that are in, all 18 districts. And that it has been a problem in the past that some districts aren't properly represented. And I know with 65, 67, and 115, we've had questions whether we can provide services to our students with special needs in district as opposed to working with NSSED. But for the near-term future, we are going to plan on sticking with the NSSED, and we'll just try to make sure we leverage it to get maximum value, for our students. That's all I have. Our next meeting will be August 29th.
Thank you, Mr. Moorman. Are there any questions for Mr. Moorman? No? Then we can move straight on to action items, the first of which is the approval of postage machine lease.
Hello. One of the responsibilities of the tech department at Lake Forest High School is to process the mail for both the high school and for this facility, the administrative center. We currently have 2 pieces of equipment that we use for that, a mail meter, which we lease, and a folder inserter, which we purchased outright. The mail meter is, the lease on the mail meter is up, has been up for a while. The vendor has allowed us to go month to month, but has informed us that they are no longer willing to have that arrangement and would like for us to lease a new piece of equipment. So we went out and we solicited quotes from 3 vendors, FP Mailing Solutions, Neopost, and Pitney Bowes. When we looked at the equipment that FP provided us, we did not feel that it met our needs, so that really left us with Pitney Bowes and Neopost. We then compared their prices for purchasing the folder inserter and leasing the mail meter. So right now, since we're talking about the mail meter, the recommendation that I'm hoping that the board will approve is to lease a mail meter from Pitney Bowes for a term of 63 months. Questions?
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I just have one, Cornelius. Does this equipment, both the postage machine and you're about to talk about the folding machine, I have a feeling, is that shared services equipment? Or
That is not shared services equipment.
does it handle, the language in the letter led me to believe that that all of 67's postage actually went.
No, 67 has its own Pitney Bowes machine. Their postage goes through 67.
Okay. Thank you.
The administrative center postage, though, goes through the high school, irrespective of district.
Okay. Is there any cost-sharing mechanism at work there, or?
I do not believe so. We can certainly put something in, but I do not believe at the current time it is.
Okay, so when you say 67, you mean 67 academic building?
Yes.
Postage gets handled separately, but
Yes.
67 administrative postage does get handled through these machines
Yes.
as well?
Yes.
Okay, well, it may be something we ought to look into. I mean, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. I know it's not a tremendous amount of money on the one hand, the other. If there are other things of that nature that could be addressed at the same time, maybe it's worth taking a look at.
Other questions? May I have a motion for the approval of the postage machine lease, please?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Have a roll call, please.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Black?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye. The motion carries, and the next item on the list is the aforementioned folding machine purchase, which,
Yes. This recommendation is to, instead of leasing the folding machine, to outright purchase the folding machine and to pay a monthly maintenance fee on that machine to ensure that it functions and can be repaired over the course of the time that we have it. The last folding machine that we purchased was purchased probably 10 years ago, and we anticipate that even though we're looking at we quoted a term of 63 months because that is the term that the vendors quoted, we anticipate that equipment will last longer than the 63-month term.
any questions on the folding machine? I have a motion for the approval of the folding machine purchase.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Black?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye. Motion is carried. The next item is the adoption of the resolution to display the tentative budget for the 2013-14 year. Mr. Albus.
Thank you. We're going to tag team this a little bit, but to start, we're going to do a snapshot review of the FY13 budget summary. I have to point out, though, before I start, that we receive our first installment of property taxes around mid-June. And because those funds are intended for the school year that starts on July 1, we often adjust the recognition of those funds to coincide with the year for which they're intended. That adjustment of early taxes is included in this analysis. Additionally, this analysis excludes transfers between funds and other financing sources, such as the debt certificates that were issued in April, as they can distort the data. The purpose of this review is to provide a snapshot of FY13 revenues and expenses and how they compare to the budget prepared in the spring of 2012. So the column that you see up there right now shows the budgeted revenue. And if you were to look further back in your board packet to the monthly financial reports, those numbers would coincide with the revenue figures for each of the individual funds. The next column shows the unaudited, just off our general ledger, receipts that were received in the individual funds. And you can see the variances that we experienced. So I'm going to jump down to the bottom on the variance column. It's a variance of about $343,000 to the positive, which is less than 1% of budgeted revenues. So we're very comfortable with that. On the expense side, we had a budget of $43.8 million in expenses, but you'll see our actual expenses were $42.8, so almost $1 million difference. But in looking at that on the surface, that seems like a pretty significant variance, but I want to point out one thing. When we prepared the budget in the spring of 2012, the Dectron unit that we talked about was budgeted to be replaced during 12-13. We went out to bid on that. The bids came in almost double the initial projections and still about $200,000 above what we had in the budget. So we recommended last fall, and the board approved rejecting those bids, and we delayed that project and came at it a different way. And so that project will be completed in the FY14 budget. But as a result of delaying that, there's about $700,000 that went unexpended. So if you account for that and you take that out, then the variance on the expenses, we are under budget by roughly $300,000. Again, less than a 1% variance. We're very happy with the budget this year because variances on both sides of the ledger, on the revenues and the expenses, were positive. Some years you might be over on the expense, but you might take in a little more money, and they kind of cancel each other out. We're proud of the budget process we use and the way this came out, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Hermes right now. She's going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies and the things that we do in developing the budget, then give you an overview of the FY14 budget. Keep in mind the budget will be on display from now until September, and that's 30 days is required by statute. That just fits into our calendar with this meeting and the fact that we don't meet in August. But during that entire period, it's on display, and we're available to answer questions, whether it's from the board or from the general public, on any aspect of the budget. Thank you.
Told Cornelius I was going old school on the technology. I think he was a little surprised. I want to talk a little bit about the process, and then we'll get into a little bit more specifics on some of the numbers and how that looks going forward. But when we start to build the budget, really we talk about building blocks. And the process starts usually January, February-ish, and we have a few things going on at the same time. Really, that's when we're doing a lot of our scheduling. At the high school, we're starting to build our class schedules. We're trying to build class loads. We're looking at what the appropriate staffing levels are. At the same time, we communicate typically around spring break to all of the departments. So we're sending information specifically out to special education, technology, curriculum, human resources, cafeteria, buildings and grounds, athletics. I see Tim here today. All of those places, one of them being the principal's office. So we really get all that information out. We give them information on their actuals. We give them information on where they are to date, any other information that we have available. At the same time, then we continue to drill down. We run open enrollment in the spring for a lot of our benefits. So we'll start to take a look at those. When I talk about the building blocks, we spend a lot of time on staffing. Staffing is probably 70% with salary and benefits all in of our ultimate operating expenses. So, of course, that's where we're going to spend an amazing amount of time. We build those budget lines person by person. And I'm not talking just the certified staff, because that seems to be a real obvious place to start with every teacher, what FTE they're teaching, what's their salary placement on the salary schedule. We do all of those, but we also go down to every single support staff member. Are they 5 hours a day? Are they 5.5 hours a day? What's their current rate of pay? What's the anticipated increase? And we build those out for every single support staff person that we have. Do we have any other known contractual relationships? We start to build those. Those would be our shared service personnel. So that really is kind of a zero base. Those are birds in hand. The high school had very few openings this year, and they were filled fairly early. The board may recall March, April was a big, heavy hiring season for the bits and pieces that we had. So going into 13-14, we feel really confident, in particular with our salary budgets, because really the information was so well known at that point. Like I mentioned, the benefits and the open enrollment, that's a little trickier depending on when we decide to put the budget on display, because open enrollment is right at the end of school. We also had a benefits audit this year for our health insurance, so we did have some changes as a result of changes that people made as a result of that process. The schools themselves, the principal of the school, and I'm meeting with Barry, I think, tomorrow to go over some of the pieces. I did have the opportunity to meet with Mr. Hoffman in early spring, I believe, at the beginning of March. The principal's office is responsible for a lot. The departments that I mentioned handle their departmental budgets, but the principal's office really oversees the supplies and materials, specifically down to the science lab level, down to the English department level. Those instructional curricular level type of budgets are kind of run through the principal's office. In coordination, I do believe, with like the dean's office, the assistant principal, he meets with the librarian, those type of things. So we will see those budgets start to be returned to us. I talk about it kind of like building a puzzle. So you have your building blocks. You try to drop in your salaries first. That's a really big piece, and the benefits, and those are kind of the easier pieces. Surprisingly, it's all these little pieces because you're not quite sure what the picture is going to look like until you get all the pieces in. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk through, and just for process, when we return to in September, we actually do a formal budget hearing. It actually precedes the board meeting at that September meeting. We do a formal presentation with a PowerPoint into the details of specific budget before the board takes action that evening. But I'll kind of hit the highlights. Not very straight. All right, 13-14. Revenue is expected to be over expenses by $698,000. This is a slight tweak. Those of you that were able to attend finance last week, I like to present the most accurate and up-to-date information I can. So we did have a couple of grant tweaks between last Tuesday or Wednesday and today, so I did get those in. But we are predicting a pretty good year. And if you recall, this is very similar to what we put through in the 5-year. We've talked about rebuilding some of our balances, and that's exactly what this budget does. I want to dive in just a little. I offered to go through all 63 pages, but I was told it was unnecessary. But I want to go 2 more levels. So the next level I want to take a look at is, what does that mean? How does this vary from where we were in 12-13 and the budget that Mr. Elvis just talked about? What I did to make this kind of apples to apples is I did remove debt services and, of course, capital projects because of that bond issuance would really kind of skew things. You can see that our revenue increases by 3.09% over our revenue from last year. We did see an increase in some federal revenue, which is always appreciated. And then you can take a look at our expenses, all funds, all operating funds, of 2.6%. The Ed Fund O&M relatively flat, 1 to 2%, not huge increases. There is a jump in transportation. While the percentage looks a little shocking at 17, that's actually a really small fund. And you'll be probably hearing about this in further. I know I mentioned it at finance, but we did have a significant increase in special education transportation as it relates to some of our cab services and as it relates to some of our transition students. So we've had some internal discussions on how we may address that going forward. I would not be surprised if you see a recommendation sometime this school year related to that. To go down one more level, as I mentioned, we're a lot in salaries and benefits, but we're also a lot in the education fund overall. So I'm just going to take it one more level down into the Ed Fund, which is 80% of our operating expenses. Those of you familiar with school fund accounting in Illinois, the funds, as they're described, are mandated by the state of Illinois. So certain expenditures that are applicable to what they consider instructional programming in support of that instructional program are designated as Ed Fund expenses, different than buildings and grounds, maintenance, those type of things, what are required to be in the operations and maintenance fund, and so on and so forth. So the funds kind of are outlined for us. Breaking it down into the Ed Fund, 80% of our operating funds, you'll see that revenue in the Ed Fund is actually down just a dip, 33.33%. And a lot of that is, you can see, is local revenue. Local revenue, of course, the majority of our local revenue is our property taxes. And the board has the ability, and the administration has the ability to distribute the tax levy among the various funds that the board has. So for this upcoming year, we did allocate a little more to the other funds, the O&M fund in particular, than the Ed Fund this year. But that doesn't change the overall revenue stream, just where we allocated this particular year. State funding, fairly flat. Mr. Elvis, I don't believe, mentioned it specifically, but state actually made up a couple of their payments this year. So we received 5 payments, one more than we anticipated for 12-13, which is fantastic. They still owe us one more. Maybe we'll make that up in 13-14. We haven't counted on it, but perhaps they might kick that in this upcoming year. I mentioned the federal revenue. That would be our title money, is up just a tad. Looking at the expenditures, taking a look at the salary line, we're up 1.59%. Largely that is contractual, so we do have our certified staff, teaching staff is through the LFEA contract. And then the non-certified staff at the high school is non-union, and the board has previously taken action on those compensation packages earlier this year. Those are all reflected. In addition, all of our retirements that retired out and all those bits and pieces of new hires, as I mentioned, are now included. Benefits up 1.92. I won't go through purchase services, supplies, capital outlay. Some of that will vary by project to project, year to year. We typically don't see all of the supply money spent every year. Some of those are things in anticipation of, and they may or may not get to some of those projects. Always interesting to point out, like I said, the state not only mandates the funds, they also mandate what the objects are. These are called objects on the state's reporting. Other is actually, for the most part, tuition. Special education tuition is the biggest part of other. A few years ago, it actually had its own line, its own object in the state's chart of accounts that said tuition, which I thought was nice and clear. However, now they lump it into something called other. So majority of that is special education, both NSSED that Mr. Moorman talked about, payment for those programs, but also any out-of-district, maybe a room and board type of payment would also be included in that. Termination benefits, those are your contractual benefits that you have for your certified staff as part of the contract. I believe that we had 8 certified retirements for 12-13. There were some contractual post-retirement benefits that will be paid out during this fiscal year, and that's what's included there. And I really wanted to walk through the Ed Fund in particular, at least to this level. I did include some light reading material in the board's packet, and I do believe Ms. Barrett has some for anybody else that might want the light reading. We prepare kind of a district format. I presented here the Ed Fund, but we also have all the backup to the Ed Fund in this book, and every single fund is represented in addition to the Ed Fund. So that's the light reading. Also provided to you, which I think is less useful, as you've heard me probably say before, but the state form, which is the required form that after the board adopts, then we would file with the state of Illinois. So that's a prescribed format that we are required to do. I believe Ms. Barrett also has copies for anybody that is interested. One other thing I just would like to point out, one of the benefits of shared service is sometimes we can use the same cover memos. One of the disadvantages are sometimes we don't catch that it says D67 on the cover memo to the board's packet. So 2 changes on the memo that went to the board. The content behind is all solid D115, but it does say D67, though it would be the same. We do need to require by law, we are required by law to adopt our budget by the end of September 30th, which is the end of our first quarter. And also the cover memo says that the hearing date is September 24th. That would be the D67 hearing date for those that are interested. The high school's hearing date is actually the date of the September board meeting, which is September 17th. As I mentioned, there will be a formal budget hearing, and then the board does take action later in that same evening. I am more than happy to answer any questions that I can.
Does anyone have any questions?
Or you also have from now until September to formulate them.
So this truly is just the approval to make it public.
You're approving the resolution, which establishes the date of the hearing and authorizing us to put it on display. And we also advertise in the newspaper that it is available for public inspection if anyone so chooses.
If there aren't any questions, may I have a motion to approve the resolution to display the tentative budget?
So moved.
Second.
If there's no discussion, may I please have a roll call?
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye. The motion is carried. Move on to the approval of administrative enabling agreement. Mr. Simic?
Thank you, Mr. Bergner. This is the final step in the process of approving Mrs. Fagel for shared service work. The D67 board has already taken action on the enabling agreement. We are learning as we are going, as reported earlier to the board, about the complexities of shared service as it relates to shared service contracts and Forensic is working through some final details on how we can streamline this process. Mr. Albus and Mrs. Hermes are going to be in contact with them sometime this week and hopefully have a process that can be presented to the board that will avoid the one-by-one approval of enabling agreements. But to be clear, enabling agreement in this case is the agreement from both parties, D115 and 67, to share the cost of the employee as determined in their respective budgets.
Thank you. Are there any questions about the enabling agreement? No. May I have a motion for the approval of the administrative enabling agreement?
So moved.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin? Mrs.
Sorry.
Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye. The motion is carried. Next, we have the approval. This is vague. You can
It's
sleep
official,
now.
Mrs. Fagel, you're here.
Next, we have the approval of the student athletic participation. Mr. Simic.
Yes, I received a request from Mr. Burkhalter late last week that we add this to the board agenda through extenuating circumstances. We have a student that he is going to be recommending that the board approve continued participation, athletic participation eligibility within our district. And Mr. Burkhalter, so you know, the names, the student's name and the family's name have been redacted from the public packet on this. The board is aware of the child's name and the family's name. So if you'd like to advocate for why you believe this is a good thing for this child and for the board to approve this, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. The Illinois High School Association has a number of bylaws that govern participation in athletics, particularly as it relates to student athletes who either come to our school or plan to stay at our school. This particular bylaw allows someone who's attended our school for since the beginning of their freshman year through the 11th grade to be granted eligibility in their 12th grade year, provided they meet 3 stipulations of the bylaw. The first stipulation requires that they live, this is when a parent parents move away, they are allowed to stay and complete their education at the school they started at. So we have a student athlete whose parents are moving. They're in the process of that as we speak. The IHSA requires that the student, if not yet 18, reside with their parents, a custodial parent, a non-custodial parent, or a court-appointed legal guardian. The second prong of the bylaw requires approval by the Board of Education, and the third prong is that there's no evidence of undue influence. We are in the process, parallel to this conversation with the court systems, of establishing the court-appointed legal guardianship. I did receive notification today that we should have that in hand by the end of the month. We will present that directly to the Illinois High School Association for their review and approval. And I'm here to also indicate that there's no evidence of undue influence for this student athlete to stay and complete their studies at Lake Forest High School while being granted participation eligibility. I am here to ask the board to consider approving the second prong of that, that he would be granted permission to do so by the Board of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Burkholder. Are there any questions? Is it fair to say that the board's approval tonight of this, these are all interdependent on one another, so board approval, is, if it's not coupled with the court approval?
That is correct. If we were not able to produce the first prong of that to the Illinois High School Association, the second prong board education approval would not govern that. It would be that we'd have to have the whole package. All three prongs would have to be met.
Great, thank you. If there aren't any questions, may I have a motion to approve the student athletic participation, please?
So moved.
And second.
Is there a roll call, please?
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Bergener?
Aye. Motion is carried. Next item is approval of release of executive session minutes from January 2013 through May of 2013. I'm not sure that there's anything to present on this other than to ask if anyone has reviewed the minutes, if anyone who has reviewed the minutes has any issues with them being released into the public. If not, can I have a motion to approve the release of those executive session minutes from January 2013 through May of 2013, please?
So moved.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Bergener?
Aye. Motion is carried. Next is our human resources report. Do we have such a report from Dr. Henriksen or?
Yeah, that's what I'm just.
Dr. Henriksen, would you like to be put on the spot for your first D115 board meeting?
Say that I'm not prepared, but Allison Stempian has done a wonderful job of getting us ready and carrying on Jen Knight's work with the HR report and the small number of hiring that we're doing right now. Is this what you're looking for? Okay. Outstanding, we have theater manager still coming. We've got final rounds of interviews on Thursday. We have some TAs, teacher assistants to hire still. But other than that, we're in really good shape for the beginning of the year. So we have a few people on the report. Proud of them. Done some background checks and French teacher, a few others that are going to be important to us in the future. So sorry for the generality.
That's great, thank you.
And one note on this, as emailed earlier to the board, there is from the original board packet to what the board, that we are recommending that the board approve today, there is the one elimination of one hiring recommendation from the list so that we could do additional research into that particular candidate.
Any questions on the human resources report? Questions? If none, can I have a motion to approve the human resources report as presented with the exception of the previously reported name, which will be withheld until the next meeting, I presume?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Block?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Bergener?
Aye. Motion is carried. Next, we have the consent agenda. If any board member would like to have any item separated from the consent agenda for individual discussion or removed, please speak. If not, the consent agenda includes approval of disbursements, payroll, and financial statements for June 2013, minutes of a regular meeting from June 11th, 2013, minutes of an executive session on June 11, 2013, minutes of a public hearing held on June 26th, 2013, minutes of an executive session held on June 26, 2013, minutes of a special meeting held on June 26, 2013, and disposal of audio recordings from November 8th and 28th of 2011. I have a motion for the approval, please.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mr. Moorman?
Aye.
Mr. Black?
Aye.
Mr. Edson?
Aye.
Mrs. Snoblin?
Aye.
Mr. Schreiber?
Aye.
Mr. Bergner?
Aye. Motion is carried. We had 4 FOIA requests since our last meeting, 1 from Family Taxpayers Foundation and 3 from Mrs. Nancy Thorner. Announcements: there will be no meeting held in the month of August, no regularly scheduled meeting anyway. No specially scheduled meeting at this stage of the game either. On Friday, August 23rd, Freshman Orientation Day. On Monday, August 26th, it's the first day of school for all students. Monday, September 2nd is Labor Day, so there will be no school, and the next meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, September 17th at 7 p.m. in this room. I have a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.